Before the name Trump became a global symbol of power and gold-plated skyscrapers, it belonged to a 16-year-old boy who fled across the Atlantic in the dead of night, and years later was humiliatingly banned from ever coming back. Documents don't prove everything, but they prove enough. One of the most famous family empires in modern American history didn't start with the classic American dream. It started with a midnight escape, fake mining claims, and the dirty capital of the Wild West. Today, we are opening the forgotten state archives of Friedrich Trump, Donald Trump's grandfather. How did one teenager build a fortune on the darkest weaknesses of the frontier? And why did his homeland permanently lock him out? Number 1. The Midnight Escape on the SS Eider. Our story begins in Karlstadt, a tiny, quiet wine-growing village in the Kingdom of Bavaria. It's October 19, 1885. The Trump family is asleep. A 16-year-old Friedrich Trump, a skinny barber's apprentice, quietly packs a single small suitcase. He doesn't wake his mother to say goodbye. He simply leaves a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen table, slips out into the freezing night, and boards a train to Bremen. Days later, he buys a third-class steerage ticket on the ocean liner SS Eider, bound for New York. For decades, the official family legend painted this as a heroic leap into the unknown, a young man bravely chasing new opportunities across the ocean. But Imperial German archives reveal a deeply pragmatic reality. This wasn't the American dream, it was a desperate flight from duty. In the newly unified German Empire, the military machine of Otto von Bismarck was expanding, and conscription was mandatory and inescapable. Friedrich fled just days before he was legally required to register for 3 years of grueling service in the Imperial Army. He knew that staying meant the barracks, refusing could mean punishment, disgrace, and a permanent mark in the state records. When the SS Eider arrived at Castle Garden, New York in October 1885, years before Ellis Island even opened, Friedrich stepped onto American soil as just another hopeful immigrant. But in the eyes of the Kingdom of Bavaria, he was a fugitive from the law and a draft evader. This single, silent choice in the middle of the night would come back to haunt him 2 decades later. Number 2. The Barber and the Lawless Lava Beds. For his first 6 years in New York, Friedrich, who quickly anglicized his name to Fred Trump, lived with his older sister and worked as a barber in Manhattan. But standing behind a chair with a pair of scissors, shaving men for pennies a day, wasn't going to build an empire. Fred was calculating, and he quickly realized that honest, backbreaking labor was not the fastest route to real wealth. In 1891, he made a decision that changed the family's trajectory forever. He packed his bags and headed to the very edge of the civilized world, Seattle, Washington. Seattle had just been completely devastated by the Great Fire, and it was rebuilding at a frantic pace. It was a muddy, chaotic boomtown swarming with rough timbermen, sailors, and fortune-seekers with pockets full of cash and nowhere to spend it. Fred bought a sleazy local establishment called the Poodle Dog, later opening a place called the Dairy Restaurant. But here's the catch. He didn't open this restaurant in a respectable part of town. He specifically chose a location at 208 Washington Street. This was the dead center of the Lava Beds, Seattle's most notorious violent and lawless red light district. While the sign outside politely said restaurant, historians of the Pacific Northwest point to a widely known frontier reality. Establishments like Fred's operated in a gray zone where food, heavy drinking, gambling, and prostitution existed seamlessly under one roof. In the Lava Beds, saloons employed women known as box rustlers. Their specific job was to lure lonely, wealthy men into private curtained booths and force them to buy incredibly overpriced liquor to keep the company going. Fred Trump quickly learned the ruthless rules of this game, laying the absolute foundation of his wealth in the most dangerous and immoral district on the West Coast. Number 3. The Fake Rockefeller Claim. By the spring of 1894, rumors of massive gold and silver deposits in the Cascade Mountains triggered a frenzy. A remote mining town called Monte Cristo was booming. It was so promising that the richest man in the world, John D. Rockefeller, personally funded a railroad right into the mountains to extract the ore. Fred Trump immediately followed the money. But when he arrived in Monte Cristo, he didn't buy a pickaxe. He didn't dig a single hole in the ground. Instead, he executed a brilliant, audacious, and legally questionable land grab. Under the US Placer Act, any citizen could claim a piece of public land for free, as long as they formally swore they were going to mine it for gold or silver. Fred Trump found a perfectly flat, highly desirable piece of land sitting right next to Rockefeller's brand new train station. There wasn't a single ounce of gold on this plot, but Fred cold-bloodedly filed a mining claim on it anyway. Federal law strictly prohibited building commercial businesses on land claimed for mineral extraction. Fred completely ignored the law. Right on top of his questionable gold mine, he built a massive two-story boarding house and saloon. He legally hijacked the most valuable commercial real estate in the city without paying a dime for the land. By the time the actual landowners and mining syndicates realized a massive saloon was sitting on their property, Trump had already squeezed every drop of profit from the town, packed up his earnings, and prepared for his next adventure. Number 4. Dead Horse Trail and the Dark Meat Rumor. In 1897, the world lost its mind. The Klondike Gold Rush began. Over 100,000 desperate prospectors stampeded toward the frozen Canadian Yukon. To get to the gold fields, these men had to cross the White Pass. It was a frozen, jagged nightmare of a route. The conditions were so horrific, the mud so deep, and the prospectors so frantic that over 3,000 pack horses died of starvation, broken legs, and freezing temperatures. The pass became historically infamous under a chilling name, the Dead Horse Trail. Their rotting, frozen carcasses literally paved the path for miles. Right in the middle of this frozen hell, on the shores of Lake Bennett, Fred Trump set up his masterpiece, the Arctic Restaurant. He was not a gold digger. He was a man who sold survival, warmth, and vice to those freezing in the pursuit of gold. Fresh meat was the rarest luxury in the Yukon, yet Trump's menu boasted a steady supply of steak and cutlets. This brings us to one of the darkest legends of the Klondike. Among surviving prospectors, a gruesome rumor circulated. They whispered that the restaurant didn't always import expensive beef from the South. Instead, the rumor claimed, Trump's operation utilized the meat of those thousands of dead, frozen horses scattered along the trail, heavily spicing it to mask the taste and texture before serving it to starving men. There is no definitive proof of this today, and no health inspectors existed in the Yukon to verify it. But in the desperate, lawless conditions of the wild frontier, such practices were more than just a myth, and it perfectly highlighted the cutthroat reputation Fred Trump had earned. Number 5. Heavy Curtains and Gold Dust. In the year 1900, as the massive rush moved further north, Fred Trump did something incredible. He dismantled his massive two-story hotel, put the timber on a barge, and floated it down the dangerous Yukon River to the booming town of Whitehorse. The new Arctic restaurant and hotel was a marvel of the frontier. It operated 24 hours a day. The standard cash registers were replaced by highly sensitive scales to weigh the raw gold dust that miners used to pay for their drinks. But the real money wasn't in the alcohol or the food. In official surviving newspaper advertisements from that era, Trump's hotel delicately boasted that it offered private boxes for ladies and parties. The upper floors and back rooms of the Arctic Hotel were outfitted with tiny beds, separated from the main hallways by thick, heavy curtains. Inside these booths worked the sporting ladies of the frontier. Prospectors who had spent years living in frozen tents, surviving on beans and ice, would stumble into Whitehorse with heavy pouches of gold and spend it all in a single night of comfort and female companionship. Fred Trump was harvesting the dirty capital of the frontier. These exact funds, extracted in curtained rooms on the edge of the world, would become the very financial reserves that the gleaming skyscrapers of New York would be built upon decades later. Number 6. The Perfect Escape. By the spring of 1901, most saloon and hotel owners on the Klondike were still blinded by greed, taking out massive loans to expand their businesses, believing the gold would flow forever. Suddenly, Fred Trump did something that still raises eyebrows among historians and researchers. Out of nowhere, in a matter of weeks, he sold his entire share of the business to his partner, a man named Ernest Levin. Fred packed his bags, took his massive fortune in gold and cash and abandoned the Yukon forever. It looked like a sudden, paranoid retreat, but it turned out to be terrifyingly precise timing. Just weeks after Fred Trump left, the Canadian authorities launched a massive, merciless crackdown. The legendary Northwest Mounted Police, led by the infamous Superintendent Sam Steele, decided to aggressively clean up the Yukon. They enforced strict laws, raiding brothels, shutting down gambling rings, and restricting alcohol sales. Rival hotel owners were shut down overnight, their properties seized, and Fred's former partner, Ernest Levin, was eventually arrested for illegal liquor sales and went completely bankrupt. There is a highly credible theory that Trump, using his deep pockets and connections, was tipped off by corrupt officials about the government sweep beforehand. This allowed him to extract his fortune absolutely intact, right before the law kicked down the door. Number 7. The Bavarian Trap. In 1901, a fabulously wealthy Fred Trump returned to Karlstadt, Germany. He paraded his new wealth, bought fine clothes, and quickly married a young girl living next door named Elizabeth Christ. They briefly moved to New York, but Elizabeth became severely homesick, unable to adjust to the noise and chaos of America. And so, in 1904, Fred Trump made a fatal miscalculation. He decided to move his family back to Germany forever. To prove his worth and establish himself among the local elite, Fred deposited 80,000 marks into a local bank, an absolute fortune at the time. He then formally applied to regain his Bavarian citizenship, utterly confident that his massive American wealth would buy him respect and wipe his slate clean. He brutally underestimated the meticulous nature of German bureaucracy. When his application hit the desks of the Ministry of the Interior, the government didn't see a successful international investor. They saw an old file pulled from the state archives. The records clearly showed that Friedrich Trump had fled the country precisely before his mandatory military service, and now that he was safely past the draft age, he had arrogantly decided to return. To the German Empire, he was not a VIP. He remained a man who had broken the law. Number 8. The Humiliating Letter to the Prince. On February 27, 1905, the Kingdom of Bavaria issued a devastating decree. Friedrich Trump's application for citizenship was formally denied. He was given exactly 8 weeks to liquidate his assets and leave the country. If he did not leave voluntarily, the authorities would forcibly expel him. For the proud, wealthy returnee who was used to buying his way out of problems, this was a crushing defeat. Panicking, Fred hired the best lawyers and took desperate measures. In the state archives of Speyer, Germany, the original letter that Fred Trump wrote to Luitpold, the Prince Regent of Bavaria, is still perfectly preserved. The tone of the document is absolutely shocking, especially when compared to the never apologize, never surrender brand his family is known for today. Fred refers to the Prince Regent as the most serene, most powerful, most beloved, noble, wise, and just sovereign. He literally begs for mercy on paper, writing about his sick, pregnant wife, pleading with the monarch to let them stay in their homeland. A few days later, the prince's chancellery reviewed the letter. The response was exceptionally brief and brutal. On the margins of Trump's desperate plea, the state stamped a single, cold resolution: request denied. Number 9. The Ultimate Butterfly Effect. On July 1, 1905, having lost his battle with the German state, Fred Trump and his weeping wife boarded the SS Pennsylvania in Hamburg, bound for New York. Historians look at this specific boat ride as one of the strangest butterfly effects in American family history. On board that ship, crossing the rough Atlantic Ocean, Elizabeth Trump was heavily pregnant. That boy, born in October 1905, shortly after they arrived in New York, was Friedrich Trump, the future father of Donald Trump. The irony here reaches its absolute peak. The American dynasty was born not because Germany forgave Friedrich Trump, but because it aggressively refused to take him back. If Prince Luitpold had accepted Fred's groveling letter and his 80,000 marks, Friedrich Trump would have been born a German citizen in Bavaria. Donald Trump would never have been born in Queens, would never have built Trump Tower and would certainly never have become the 45th President of the United States. America inherited the Trump dynasty purely due to the unforgiving rigidity of Bavarian military law. Number 10. The Spanish Flu, the Poison Rumor, and the Final Legacy. Banished back to New York for good, Fred Trump channeled his massive frontier capital into a new game, buying up cheap plots of land in the borough of Queens, laying the very first bricks of the family's real estate monopoly. But his life ended as suddenly and violently as he had lived it. In late May 1918, while walking down Jamaica Avenue with his son, the 49-year-old frontier-made businessman suddenly felt a wave of acute sickness. He was taken home, and the very next day, this tough, seemingly invincible man died. The official cause of death was instantly recorded as the Spanish flu. Fred Trump became one of the very first documented victims of the devastating pandemic that was just beginning to sweep through New York City. However, almost immediately, a very dark rumor began to circulate among the rival real estate developers of Brooklyn and Queens. Fred had brought his cutthroat frontier business tactics to the streets of New York, making plenty of ruthless enemies along the way. In the back rooms of the city, people whispered that competitors had simply poisoned him to get him out of the market, and the conveniently timed chaotic outbreak of the Spanish flu provided the perfect cover for the authorities to skip an autopsy. There is no proof to support this assassination theory today, but the fact that the legend existed at all shows exactly what kind of dark, formidable reputation this man had built. From a midnight escape in a quiet German village to fake gold claims, Klondike brothels, and humiliating letters to royalty, the history of the Trump dynasty proves a harsh reality. Great empires rarely start with spotless, heroic biographies. They are born in the shadows, built on the gray areas of the law, and fueled by a ruthless calculation that most ordinary people simply don't possess. The man who was rejected by his own homeland left behind the seeds of a bloodline that would grow to dominate the most powerful nation on earth. What do you think? Did the Kingdom of Bavaria do the right thing by kicking him out, or did their strict laws accidentally change American history? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the forgotten files of history.